All right, very common misconception, not just among actual Sabbath keepers, but just, people in general seem to think that a Hebrew day begins at sunset, and that's not true. It begins at sunrise. And we're going to start by showing scripture that goes against the sunset to sunset idea by showing that biblical days begin at sunrise instead. And we're also going to show several scholarly sources and quotations from people who also discussed this issue before. Okay? And we're going to show the origin of where the evening to evening day comes from. It's actually from Babylon. So, just some of the first scriptures we want to start off with Leviticus 7, verse 15. So I'll read it. It says, "And the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offerings for thanksgiving shall be eaten the same day that it is offered. He shall not leave any of it until the morning." Okay, so if you have to eat the sacrifice the same day and the deadline is the next day's morning, well, that means that a new day begins at morning, and that's what ends the previous day, not sunset. Okay? So another example here, 1 Samuel 19, verses 10 to 11. And Saul sought to smite David even to the wall with the javelin, but he slipped away out of Saul's presence, and he smote the javelin into the wall. And David fled and escaped that night. So it's nighttime. Verse 11. Saul also sent messengers unto David's house to watch him and to slay him in the morning. And Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, If thou save not thy life tonight, tomorrow thou shalt be slain. Okay, so it's already nighttime. He's going to be slain in the morning, the next morning, and Michael is saying that that's going to be tomorrow because the new day begins at morning. Okay, so that's a good example there. Now here's Genesis chapter 19, verses 33 to 34. It says, And they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he perceived not when she lay down, nor when she arose. Verse 34. And it came to pass on the morrow that the firstborn said unto the younger, Behold, I lay yesternight with my father. Let us make him drink wine this night also, and go thou in and lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. Okay, so yesternight, that means that, because it was morning right there, and they said yesternight because that night was not the same time. It was separated from the morning as two different days. Otherwise, it would say this night, but no, this night obviously referred to the next night, the one that was upcoming, not the previous one. So a new day, again, it's separated from the previous night. Morning is when a new day begins. Okay, so that's Genesis 19. Okay, and here's another one, Numbers 11:32. So it says, And the people stood up all that day, and all that night, and all the next day, and they gathered the quails. He that gathered least gathered 10 omers, and they spread them all abroad for themselves round about the camp. Okay, so it says all that day, and all that night, and all the next day. So that day, that night, those are both part of the same day, and then all the next day. It doesn't become the next until daytime, not nighttime. It doesn't say all the next night, all that night is what it says. Okay. So here's another one, John 20:19, and it's just the same thing in Mark 4 35. So go check that one out as well. But it says, Then the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut, when the disciples were assembled for fear of the Jews, came Yeshua and stood in the midst and saith unto them, Peace be unto you. So the same day at evening. Well, how does that make any sense if evening is supposed to begin a new day and then the previous one? Well, no, it's saying that the same day is at evening because evening doesn't begin a new day, morning does. Again, same thing in Mark 4. Okay, and this is something you really got to watch out for because people will say, oh, but could the Jews really be wrong about this? And yes, they are wrong about this. They inherited this tradition from the Babylonians. And the Messiah even warned you about this in Mark chapter 7, verses 6 to 9. And if you're someone who's in the Torah movement, then you've definitely seen this passage before. And this is a really good piece of evidence against the Christian church because they're doing all these pagan traditions like Christmas, Easter, Halloween, Sunday, Sabbath. But the evening to evening Sabbath, the Friday evening Sabbath, that's also a tradition of man that's not from God. And he warned you about these traditions of Judah in Mark 7 there, verses 6 to 9. So go read that again if you need it. But, there you go. He's warning you right there. Don't follow the traditions of Judah. And we just read from John that, one of the Messiah's disciples, he considered a day beginning at morning, not evening. And here's another one, Matthew 28, verse 1. In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. So, the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week. That means the first day of the week dawns at the same time that the Sabbath ends. So, when does the Sabbath day end? At Sunday dawn. All right, so that's uh, actually three examples there. Mark, John, and Matthew, three of the Messiah's disciples, all reckon a day from morning. So people will try to say, oh, but the Messiah never, directly mentioned how the day begins at dawn. Well, there you go. You have his apostles right there showing you how a day does begin at dawn. All right. And then another very common objective is Genesis chapter 1. And this is partly because the KJV mistranslates it. It says, evening and the morning were the first day. But if you actually check it in some other versions and you check the Strong's Concordance, you actually look at the Hebrew words, the words Erev and Boker, they are not 12-hour periods. So it's impossible to say that evening and morning are the first day, 24 hours, when Erev and Boker are not even 12 hours themselves. They just mean sunset and sunrise. They're literally different words in the Hebrew than day and night. So saying that morning is somehow 12 hours, that doesn't make any sense. What it's really saying is that God calls the light day, and the darkness he calls night, and there was evening, and there was morning the first day. And that's straight out of the English Standard Version. But even the Septuagint also translates it better than the KJV. But it's basically saying God does his work, he calls it good, sunset, sunrise, the first day ends, the second day begins. It's as simple as that. Each day from the beginning is morning to morning. Okay, and another objection that evening to evening people like to use is Nehemiah 13, verse 19. It says, like, before the Sabbath, as it began to be dark, they closed the gates. Well, if you look at Nehemiah 7, verse 3, you'll see that they closed the gates every night. So they weren't actually just closing it because it was nighttime and that's when the Sabbath began. They closed it because it was nighttime and they didn't want anyone to come in during the night. They always did that. Okay. So, and even in the Septuagint, which is the, Greek version of the Old Testament, it doesn't even mention that it was nighttime. So, right? And another one that they use is Leviticus 23, verses 27 to 32, and really they just use 32 out of context, where it says, you shall celebrate your Sabbath from evening to evening, but that's really about the Day of Atonement Sabbath. Okay, if you actually read it in context, and it says it's over 2 calendar days, the ninth and the 10th. And this is impossible if biblical days are already reckoned from evening to evening, because it would only be over 1 calendar day if that was the case. But it's not. It's only over, or sorry, it's over 2 calendar days. So, it's not even to evening. Only the Day of Atonement Sabbath is, not the normal reckoning. Okay, so those two are probably the most common, along with Genesis 1, the most common objections for why, evening to evening people say it's that way. So hopefully that explains that. And then just one more thing. People say, oh, what about all the times where people are unclean until the even? That means that the day begins at even. Well, no, it doesn't. They were just doing that so that they could come back into the camp before the night was over. God didn't want them to just sit outside the camp all night. Okay, so and now we're going to go over some of these scholarly quotes that we mentioned at the beginning here. So, Bible Thumper is going to start here, and this is basically just like the origin of where this tradition comes from. Okay, so, and you'll see it's from Babylon.
Uh, yep. When the sorry days were reckoned from morning to morning, following the reign of King Josiah, and especially after the Babylonian exile, a number of significant and enduring changes occurred in Israel calendar, showing that the Jews gradually adopted the Babylonian calendar of time. The 7-day week persisted despite its failure to divide evenly either the month or the year. The day, however, was counted from evening to evening after the Babylonian fashion. Yeah, and as you can see, this quote is literally from the New Catholic Encyclopedia, Volume 11, page 1068. So even they admit this, though they have a lot of lies. So far as we know, the Babylonian calendar was at all periods truly lunar. The month began with the evening when the new crescent was for the first time again visibly short after sunset. Consequently, the Babylonian day also began in the evening. That's a that's from Exact Science in Antiquity, page 106. And then we also have when the Jews returned to Palestine after their Babylonian exile, 516 BCE, they brought back with them the Babylonian astronomy and way of reckoning time. What is a Jew? Page 108. So all these things just go to show that they definitely inherited the way they determined the day from Babylon, though the 7 day week was kept the same. They took the sunset to sunset reckoning of days instead of taking the dawn to dawn, which God had ordained.
Right. So, and what you'll also see, and this is the next quote we got, it says, among the Greeks, the day was reckoned from sunset to sunset. So not only did the Babylonians reckon their days this way, but the Greeks, who basically came later and also got their hands on the scriptures and the New Testament and, the Old Testament, all of that, they continued this tradition. So to them, it seemed normal that the Jews were reckoning it this way because it's something that they already did as well. And it just continued on from there for 2,000 years of error, just like the church has been in error for quite a long time. So, but of course, there was always still a true remnant, just like the Messiah and his disciples, as we already showed, did reckon their days correctly. Okay, and then here's another one, that the custom of reckoning the day as beginning in the evening and lasting until the following evening was probably of late origin, is shown by the phrase "tarry all night," Judges 19 verses 6 to 9. And we can read this. The context shows that the day is regarded as beginning in the morning. In the evening, the day declined, and until the new day, morning, arrived, it was necessary to tarry all night. Compare also Numbers 11:32, which we did read, and this is from the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. So they're also trying to make arguments for this here. So Judges 19 verses 6 to 9. I'll just read verse 9 because that's really all that you really need to read. But it says, and when the man rose up to depart, he and his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the damsel's father, said unto him, Behold, now the day draweth toward evening. I pray you tarry all night. Behold, the day groweth to an end. Lodge here, that thine heart may be merry, and tomorrow get you early on your way, that thou mayest go home. So tomorrow clearly meant the next morning. That's when he was going to leave. All right. And then just last quote we got here. It says, There can be no doubt that in pre-exilic times the Israelites reckoned the day from morning to morning. The day began with the dawn and closed with the end of the night following it. That's from Jacob Salel Latterbach, Rabbinic Essays, Cincinnati Hebrew Union College Press, 1951, page 446. And again, I'll put these in the description. But point is, there is no doubt that before the exile of Israel to, both Assyria then Babylon, they were reckoning their days from morning to morning. And it wasn't until this later influence came that they started doing it incorrectly. So now, you, as someone who has heard this information, you have to make the correct change and actually start following, the correct Sabbath day, which is dawn to dawn. And I think we actually got one more scripture left. Go ahead and read that, Bible Thumper. That's Judges 16:2.
Right. Judges 16:2. And it was told the Gazites, saying, Samson is come hither. And they compassed him in, and laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city, and were quiet all the day, all the night, saying, In the morning, when it is day, we shall kill him. So it's very clear here. I mean, in the morning, when it is day. So the day is like it begins in the morning the next day.
Right. So yeah, um, you've got the information now. There's even more stuff out there. Go do your own research. It's all throughout the Bible that a day begins at sunrise. And really, it's just your own stubbornness that will keep you from actually accepting this truth because it is very clear. It's clear as day once you actually understand it. It's a more sure word of prophecy, Second Peter chapter 1. But this is something that you can't be stubborn about, otherwise you're going to be destroyed. Because Micah 2 verse 10, this is where it is in prophecy. It says that Judah has a polluted rest and it's going to destroy them, and you don't want to be destroyed because if you're breaking the Sabbath day, you're in transgression to God. So don't be making this mistake. Don't be tolerating this error within your congregation as well. Also, some people say, "Oh, it's okay if he keeps Sabbath this time, this time." Like, why don't we just tolerate people keeping the lunar Sabbath? Like, no, this is something that does matter. You have to keep the Sabbath correctly. It's Saturday dawn to Sunday dawn. You have to worship God in truth. So don't just tolerate people, that keep doing this evening to evening Sabbath as well, if you understand the truth. So I think that's all we got for right here. You got anything else to add?
No, that's all.